Ryan Carter had always cherished the quiet solitude of his farm, a sprawling piece of land just outside the neatly trimmed lawns and uniform houses of the suburban neighborhood. Here, the only rules were the ones set by nature: when to plant, when to harvest, and when to let the animals roam free. Life was simple, predictable, and exactly the way he liked it. That peace shattered the day Melinda Davenport, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, showed up uninvited, dressed in an immaculate beige pantsuit. Clipboard in hand, she strutted up his gravel driveway like she owned the place, with a tight-lipped smile that barely hid her disdain. She scanned the property like a general inspecting an unkempt battlefield. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone carrying the weight of authority she didn't actually have. "I've received multiple complaints from concerned residents about the unsightly nature of your property. It's bringing down community standards." Ryan, leaning lazily against his truck, raised an eyebrow. "You do realize this isn't part of the HOA, right?" Maddie's smile didn't waver, but her eye twitched. "Yes, well, it's adjacent to our neighborhood, which means it still affects property values. We have certain expectations here, and I believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you made a few adjustments." Ryan followed her gaze as she gestured vaguely toward his barn, the roaming chickens, and his reliable old tractor parked under an oak tree. He had half a mind to ask her which part of his livelihood she found offensive, but he already knew the answer: all of it. He chuckled. "Let me stop you right there, Maddie. My land, my rules. If you don't like the view, I suggest closing your blinds." Her nostrils flared, but she quickly regained her composure. "I was hoping we could resolve this amicably, but if you refuse to cooperate, I will take the necessary steps to ensure our community remains up to standard." Ryan didn't bother hiding his smirk as he tipped his hat. "Good luck with that." As Maddie stomped away, already typing furiously on her phone, Ryan had the distinct feeling that this wouldn't be the last time she darkened his doorstep. A few days after Maddie's unwelcome visit, Ryan found an official-looking envelope taped to his fence. The letterhead bore the HOA's logo, even though he had never signed up for their nonsense. With an amused smirk, he unfolded the paper and read, "Notice of noncompliance. Dear Mr. Carter, it has come to our attention that your property violates multiple community standards as outlined by the HOA. We respectfully request the following changes be made to bring your property in line with our guidelines. The rooster's morning crow exceeds acceptable noise levels. Your barn's red paint does not match the approved neighborhood color palette. Livestock should be properly contained out of sight to maintain a pleasant aesthetic. Your gravel driveway does not meet HOA paving standards." Ryan laughed so hard he nearly dropped the letter. Not only was his farm not under HOA jurisdiction, but the complaints were downright ridiculous. If Maddie thought she could regulate the color of his barn or demand that his rooster sleep inside, she was in for a rude awakening. A second notice arrived 2 days later. This time, Maddie herself stood at the edge of his property, watching as Ryan read it. "Mr. Carter, ignoring official HOA correspondence will not make this issue go away," she said, arms folded like a disappointed teacher scolding a student. Ryan squinted at the new list of demands. They escalated. All farm animals must be relocated or housed indoors. The fence must be replaced with an HOA-approved white picket style. All structures, including the barn, must be repainted to blend with the neighborhood aesthetic. Ryan let out a low whistle. "You really don't give up, do you?" Maddie's smile was tight and forced. "It's not about me. It's about the integrity of our community." Ryan crossed his arms. "That's nice, but I don't live in your community." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Technically, you're on the border, which means your property still has an impact on HOA members." Ryan's patience was running thin. "Then maybe they shouldn't have bought homes next to a farm," he huffed. "I was hoping we could resolve this without escalation, but if you insist on being difficult, I will take the necessary legal action." Ryan tilted his head. "Legal action for what? Owning chickens?" Maddie's eyes gleamed with the kind of smugness that only came from wielding power over others. "For devaluing property prices with your unsanctioned setup. I have a petition already in motion to have your land annexed under the HOA's jurisdiction. Once that happens, You will be required to comply. Ryan's easygoing demeanor slipped for the first time. She was actually trying to take control of his land. He let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. All right, Maddie, you want to play games? Let's play. Maddie smirked, mistaking his amusement for surrender. She turned on her heel, confident that she had won. Ryan, however, had no intention of going down without a fight. Ryan knew Maddie wasn't going to back down, but neither was he. If she wanted a war, he was more than happy to give her one. He wasn't just some clueless homeowner. He was a farmer, and farmers didn't take kindly to people try to tell them what to do with their own land. The next morning, he took action. If Maddie thought his barn was an eyesore, he'd make sure it was the most glorious eyesore she'd ever seen. He called up his buddy, an artist with a flair for the ridiculous, and by the end of the day, the barn had been transformed into a massive, brightly colored mural. On one side, a cartoonish rooster loomed over the landscape, wearing a crown. On the other, a giant highway violation notice was painted in bold, mocking detail, complete with exaggerated legal jargon. That same evening, he installed an even bigger, brighter sign at the property line: private property, not HOA territory. Trespassers will be filmed, mocked, and escorted off by chickens. The message was clear. The retaliation didn't stop there. Knowing Maddie would come snooping, Ryan installed security cameras along the fence, each one positioned to capture any trespassers, especially HOA spies. He even rigged up a motion-activated speaker that blared the sound of his rooster's loudest crow whenever someone approached the no-go zone. But Maddie wasn't about to roll over. A week later, she came storming down his driveway, flanked by two of her ever-loyal HOA cronies, clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This is harassment," she fumed, pointing wildly at the mural. "You're openly mocking the HOA." Ryan leaned lazily against his truck, chewing on a piece of straw. "I sure am," he replied. She practically vibrated with rage. "You think this is funny? This is defamation." He smirked. "I don't think you know what that word means." Her voice shot up an octave. "This is childish. You are intentionally devaluing property values." Ryan shrugged. "I thought you'd appreciate me following HOA rules, community beautification, and all that." He gestured to the bright, freshly painted barn. "Now, if you don't mind, you're trespassing." Maddie's eyes narrowed. "You think this is over? I have already filed an official complaint with the zoning board. You'll be forced to take it down, and when your land is annexed, you'll be begging to comply." Ryan's smirk remained. "Well, until then, I'll be right here, farming legally." She stormed off, but Ryan wasn't fooled. He had a feeling the real fight was just beginning. It didn't take long for word to spread through the neighborhood that Maddie was trying to take control of Ryan's farm. The battle lines were drawn, and suddenly it wasn't just Ryan against the HOA. It was the entire community watching the chaos unfold, each resident quietly choosing a side. The supporters, not everyone in the neighborhood, was thrilled with Maddie's antics. Some people loved having a farm nearby and thought the HOA had finally gone too far. Tom and Lisa, Ryan's nearest neighbors, were the first to take a stand. Tom, a retired Marine with a sharp wit, pulled up a lawn chair at the property line with a bag of popcorn. "Don't mind me," he said, grinning. "I'm just here for the show." Lisa, an avid gardener, sided with Ryan. "Maddie's just mad. She can't control you like the rest of us," she said. Old Man Jenkins, a cranky but sharp former lawyer, saw an opportunity to stir the pot. "I'll tell you what, kid," he told Ryan, adjusting his thick glasses. "If that woman so much as sets foot on your property again, I'll slap her with a trespassing suit so fast she won't know what hit her." Greg, a new homeowner, had initially been neutral until Maddie tried to rope him into signing the petition against Ryan. "Yeah, I'm not signing that," Greg told her. "I like the farm. It's got more personality than half the people in this neighborhood." The fence sitters, some residents weren't sure where they stood. They didn't want to get on MTI's bad side, but they also weren't convinced Ryan was in the wrong. Susan, the nervous single mom, lived 2 streets over. She didn't love the idea of getting involved, but whispered to Ryan when no one was looking, "I think Maddie's crazy, but if I say anything, she'll start coming after me next." Bill, the neighborhood handyman, didn't care much about HOA politics, but he did have one thing to say. All I know is if Maddie starts banning farms, what's next? My work truck? My tool shed? The HOA loyalists, of course. Maddie had her devoted followers, neighbors who thrived on drama and loved HOA control. Linda and Carol, Maddie's right-hand enforcers, doubled down on their crusade. We have to maintain standards, Linda huffed. Do you want this place to turn into a rural wasteland? Carol nodded, so hard Ryan thought her head might fall off. The rules exist for a reason. First a farm, then who knows? People painting their doors red. Jeremy, the HOA's self-proclaimed security officer, took it upon himself to patrol the edge of Ryan's property, notebook in hand. I'm documenting all violations, he said smugly. Just a matter of time before the zoning board steps in. Ryan smirked. Hope you got a camera, Jeremy. I got a rooster that loves posing for pictures. The community divide grew, with both sides digging in. Tensions in the neighborhood reached an all-time high. Some residents secretly admired Ryan's defiance, while others whispered about Maddie's growing obsession. Even people who normally stayed out of HOA drama found themselves watching, waiting to see what would happen next. And Ryan, he was just getting started. Maddie was relentless, but Ryan was patient. He knew that if she kept pushing, she'd eventually overplay her hand, and when she did, he'd be ready. Her final mistake came on a rainy Wednesday night. The HOA president, so consumed with her need for control, crossed a line she could never uncross. Ryan had been expecting something big after her last warning, something desperate. Maddie had exhausted her letters, her threats, and even her feeble attempts to get the local zoning board involved. The officials had already told her that Ryan's farm was private property, outside HOA jurisdiction, and completely legal. That should have been the end of it, but Maddie wasn't the type to accept defeat. So at 2:13 a.m., Ryan's security cameras caught something shocking. A figure, Maddie herself, dressed in black with a hood pulled up, crept onto his property, armed with a measuring tape, a can of spray paint, and a clipboard. She had clearly planned to catch Ryan in some kind of violation she could manufacture. Unfortunately for her, she forgot about the motion-activated floodlights and cameras. The moment she stepped past the "No Trespassing" sign, the entire property lit up like a football stadium. The cameras zoomed in, recording every panicked moment as she tried to scramble away, but she wasn't fast enough. Ryan, having seen the alerts pop up on his phone, he walked onto the porch with a shotgun slung casually over his shoulder. "Maddie," he called, voice dripping with amusement. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" She froze. The clipboard slipped from her hands. This isn't what it looks like." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, it looks like you're trespassing." She forced an awkward plastic smile. "I was just conducting a routine compliance check." Ryan laughed. "Routine for who? You don't have authority here, remember?" He gestured to the blinking red light on his camera. "And now I have video proof of you breaking the law." Maddie went pale. "You wouldn't?" "Oh, I absolutely would." Before she could argue, Tom from next door stepped out onto his own porch, holding up his phone. "Hey, Ryan, just got a notification from my camera. You want me to send you the footage of Maddie sneaking around your property? Or do you have it covered?" Maddie's breath hitched. More neighbors had started coming outside, drawn by the lights and commotion. Even old man Jenkins waddled out in his bathrobe, peering over his glasses. "What's going on?" he grumbled. Ryan smirked. "Oh, just HOA business." Maddie thought she'd do a surprise inspection at 2 in the morning. The murmur of the crowd grew. Even some of Maddie's own supporters looked horrified. Linda, her second in command, took a hesitant step forward. "Maddie, is this true?" Maddie's lips parted, but no words came. Ryan crossed his arms. "I've got enough footage to file a trespassing complaint and a restraining order. But I'll tell you what, if you walk away right now, drop this whole takeover my farm nonsense, and resign as HOA president, I might just let it slide." A long, heavy silence settled over the street. Maddie's hands clenched at her sides, her face twisted in rage. She looked like she wanted to scream, but with the whole neighborhood watching, she had no choice. She exhaled sharply and muttered through clenched teeth, "Fine then." Without another word, she stormed off down the road, her reign over the HOA crumbling behind her. The neighborhood buzzed for days after Maddie's humiliating downfall spread quickly, faster than even the HOA's nosiest gossips could manage. Maddie Davenport, the once unstoppable HOA president, had been caught trespassing, exposed in front of her own supporters, and forced to resign in disgrace. At first, the HOA tried to save face. Linda and Carol, her most loyal enforcers, scrambled to pretend nothing had happened. She was under a lot of stress, Carol whispered at the next meeting. Maybe we should just move on. But the residents weren't having it. Nobody wanted to be associated with Maddie's obsession. The HOA members who had blindly followed her were now embarrassed. Even Jeremy, the self-proclaimed HOA security officer, quietly stopped patrolling. Then came the icing on the cake. A few weeks later, Maddie put her house up for sale. Whether it was shame, the whispers behind her back, or the sheer humiliation of losing her kingdom, she couldn't stay. But karma had one last trick up its sleeve. Her departure property values actually went up. It turned out that residents had secretly despised Maddie's constant meddling and endless fines. The neighborhood felt lighter without her around. Meanwhile, Ryan enjoyed his uncontested victory. The farm remained exactly as it was, rooster and all. The obnoxious violation notices stopped, the nosy HOA spies disappeared, and as a final tribute to his victory, Ryan added one last touch to his barn mural. Right next to the giant cartoon rooster, he had his artist buddy paint a tiny, furious caricature of Maddie shaking her fist while drowning in HOA paperwork. It was a masterpiece. At the next neighborhood barbecue held at Ryan's farm, of course, the entire neighborhood laughed at the mural. Even some former HOA loyalists chuckled, shaking their heads. Old man Jenkins, beer in hand, patted Ryan on the back. "Damn good work, kid. You put that woman in her place." Tom grinned, raising his drink to Ryan, the man who took on the HOA and won. The crowd cheered, and as Ryan leaned back in his chair watching the sun set over his unrestricted land, he couldn't help but smirk. Maddie was gone, the HOA had backed off, and his farm had never looked better.